So this is Trevor Dale at Atrainability Radio, and today we're going to be welcoming Charlie Webster. Charlie, as I'm sure you know, is a very highly respected and renowned sports presenter. Back in the 2016 Olympics, Charlie encountered a severe bout of a rare form of malaria whilst working with the Olympics in Brazil. And the effects have been long-lasting. And what we're going to be discussing today are how the treatment of that, what we can learn from the way she was treated, what was done well, what perhaps could have been done better, and generally what we can learn from it. But it's going to have severe and long-lasting effects, in fact lifelong effects on Charlie. So we're going to be exploring that. First of all, thanks so much for coming on. And I was really, really struck and moved by your presentation at TEDx NHS, Charlie.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, that's quite a story you've got there, and actually
that was my story in like 15 minutes. You wouldn't believe how hard it was to try and write something where you can get that power across, but condense it into a short period of time. Yes.
Well, every time I clean my teeth, pretty much, I think of you, though. You know, that initial aspect of, when you said about PTSD when it struck you. It brought it all back. That must have been extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples of that. I just used the brushing my teeth because it's obviously something that we all do, morning and night, and to show that it's something that's so simple that can make you feel like that, I think really gave a perspective of what PTSD is, rather than it being something where we see it as not normal anyway. But if it's something that's so normal that can make you feel like that. So that's why, I had loads of different analogies, but that was the one where I was like, right, I can really use this to really show what it means.
Absolutely. So just for the sake of anyone who hasn't heard the story, could you just go over it again, Charlie, please?
Yeah, so to give some background, which I think is important, 3 years ago right now, I was hospitalised and I was in a coma and put on life support. However, when I was in the coma, I was almost locked in, so I was aware of my surroundings, despite the fact that doctors said I was brain damaged and unaware. And then when I came out of the coma and came out of hospital, which is what I really talked about in my TEDx NHS talk, rather than talking about the actual thing that people know about and what happened, which is when I was hospitalized, I wanted to speak about the aftermath, because I think, in our lifetimes, unfortunately, we all go through at least one traumatic event. And mine was pretty horrific, I nearly died. But what we don't ever talk about is when we try and pick up the pieces of afterwards. Yes. And that's something that I'm trying to really strongly get the message out about, because whether it's what happened to me or things that have happened in childhood or grief, in that moment, that's when we have the support and that's when people are there. But I don't know, to me, it's the aftermath that isn't talked about and that actually can be equally, if not more damaging than the actual event itself. So to give that perspective, why we're talking about brushing our teeth is not for actual brushing the teeth. It's because it's something that is so mundane that we do all the time, that all of us do, no matter where you are in the world, no matter what you've got. And that, to me, started to trigger a response, and this was in my recovery, where I brushed my teeth, and what you heard me talk about was a moment where doing that took me back to that moment where I was desperately fighting for my life, and I was so scared and terrified and isolated and alone and just distraught. And it makes you feel those exact same feelings, because when I put the toothbrush in my mouth, it basically triggered a reaction, because it was the same feeling as when I had the ventilator in my mouth. Obviously I didn't, but the way that the mind works when you've got post-traumatic stress disorder is just that physical sensation creates these like fragmented images and sounds which take you to the exact place of when the trauma happens. So it's not in our imagination, it's not, you know, oh, what's wrong with you, pull yourself together, get over the past. It's actually, you know, biological in your brain as well, because the memories haven't been chronologically stored and haven't been dealt with. And, you know, for that moment when I was in my bathroom brushing my teeth, I was in the hospital room again. I was staring at the ceiling. I was in panic. I was fighting for my life. And not just my mind started to react, but my body started to react. So adrenaline kicked through my body. It felt like I couldn't breathe. My throat started to close. And again, like I emphasized, that wasn't me imagining it or reacting. That's what my body did, because that's what the body does when it has problems afterwards from post-traumatic stress disorder. And for me, you know, for example, when I started to do a bit of walking and running and exercise again, it also happened because whenever my breathing got tight, it straight away took me back to the moment of not being able to breathe, because I couldn't breathe, and that's why I was ventilated. My lungs failed. I've had these moments on trains where I had a panic attack on the train. Again, something triggered it, and gosh, I had one in the airport. I've had one on the street. You know, all these different things and different scenarios. But for me, just capturing that moment of being on my own in a bathroom, brushing my teeth, the most simplest and most mundane interaction, to then have a reaction where I ended up distraught on the bathroom floor, crying my eyes out and desperately scared from just brushing my teeth, that to me shows how powerful post-traumatic stress disorder is, and then how it also changes your behavior.
Well, I absolutely get that. And I hope, are you okay talking about this now? Because I'm feeling a bit like I'm taking...
Sorry, you're like, oh my God, am I re-traumatizing you? No, I am fine talking about it. I think, you know, I've done a lot of work around this, and that's why I did the TED Talk, because, you know, I feel like this is something that's a real silent killer that we don't talk about. So, but yeah, thank you for asking. I want to, you know, now I'm in a position where, you know, I still have moments with it, but, you know, I want to now use my voice and my experience to hopefully raise awareness around it.
So what I'm thinking, Charlie, is, you know, the medical staff who were around you, did they understand what was going on, or were they taken aback themselves?
No, I think the medical staff, and while they were amazing, and again, just to give some context, that half of my time in hospital was spent in Rio de Janeiro in South America, in Brazil, because that's where I fell ill, and then I was repatriated to the UK and looked after by the NHS in addition to my time in Rio. And the medical staff around me were excellent, so this is not a criticism of them. They were incredible, focusing on my physical health, which I was desperate in need of. I really was critically ill. I had organ failure. I mean, I was fatally ill. They said I was going to die. Nobody recognized the mental health effects of what I'd gone through. And I think that's really my message, is we focus so much on the physical, which is obviously really important. They shouldn't be mutually exclusive. But if we don't have our mental health, then I don't know, the physical doesn't make that much difference to me. Like, I need my physical health, but I also need my mental well-being at the same time to be able to live life and, you know, not just be okay, but to actually live life. We need mental well-being. We need to look after our mental health. And I think that while everybody was incredible with what I'd gone through, and the doctors recognized how horrific it was. I mean, they themselves said it was a miracle. They themselves said that I shouldn't be here. They themselves said it was horrific what I'd gone through. And bearing in mind, I wasn't just, you know, I had to be repatriated. I was in a hospital originally that didn't speak English. So, you know, there was extra pressures. And also, you know, my story was in the press, which I do appreciate and I'm grateful for, but it also, again, brought extra pressures to, you know, my family and to me when I came out of the coma. But again, like I said, nobody checked in with me. Nobody thought that, gosh, what my brain, what my mind, what me as my soul, my identity, my self-worth, what I actually went through, didn't kind of get a look in. So what happened when I came out of hospital, the focus was entirely on, you know, my kidneys didn't work. So it was entirely on trying to get my kidneys working again. I couldn't walk, so it was relearning how to walk again. But while I was doing all those things, I was just in mental torture. And that was really hard to understand because everybody kept saying to me, oh, you're so lucky to be alive, you must be so grateful. And I was like, well, I am grateful because I fought so hard to be here and I want to be here. But then I don't know what was going on in my brain. My brain didn't feel like that. My mind didn't feel like that. I was having nightmares. I was panicking. I was scared. I just was in this like horrific mental state where I just had a reality which wasn't everybody else's reality. It was my own reality where I just felt desperately unsafe and lost and confused and, extremely low. And that wasn't recognized. That it was only because I was regularly seeing a consultant for my physical health that I kept saying to the consultant that, I'm feeling like this. I don't understand. Why am I feeling like this? I can't sleep, and I keep breaking down. I'm having nightmares. I'm having flashbacks, and I completely lost. I was a very confident, like outgoing person. I'm very risky in a good way. I'm very adventurous and like life and soul. My mates always described me as that kind of, person that was always dancing and laughing and messing about. And all of a sudden, I just wasn't that. I was scared. I just felt like I didn't know myself. And so it was because I kept saying to the consultant that I was having all these feelings, and he was just basically telling me to rest, and that he was worried because I wasn't letting myself rest. That after, months of communicating these things to him and him focusing purely on physical, which, he quite rightly should because he was a renal consultant and he was my consultant and working with the tropical diseases consultant. But because I was like, I just knew I wasn't okay, that eventually it was like, oh, well, maybe, we need to speak about getting mental health, mental health help here. And that's how it came around. But nobody even thought about that while I was in hospital or even in my aftercare. Nobody thought, we need to put a mental health thing, we need to put a mental health help in place alongside what you've physically gone through, because what my body had gone through was horrific. So if my body had gone through something so horrific where I was so damaged and my organs weren't working and I couldn't walk and I was so vulnerable, like I couldn't even go to the toilet by myself, then why is my mind okay?
Well, can I take you back a minute, Charlie, if I may? Because, you said something like they said you were going to die. And I'm just wondering what effect that had on you. Did that make you fight, or did it make you, realize just how ill you were? Or, what sort of effect did hearing that have? That's got to be devastating, surely. Yeah,
it's a good question because, I'm sure. Yeah, it's like, I don't know, it's something that we don't even think, like, how could that, I don't know, like, how do we react if somebody actually says that? Because it's something that we never think is going to happen to us. And I know we all, eventually, but I was 33 at the time, 32, 33 at the time, and really fit. I'd actually just cycled from London to Rio, 3,000 miles in 5 weeks. So I was like, the picture of the opposite of being told I was going to die. I was about to work on the Olympics. I was, young, vibrant, and I was really healthy. So then, all of a sudden, within 24 hours, I started to get these crazy symptoms of just really not feeling very well. And, I was being sick. I had diarrhea, like blood was coming out of my mouth and all these things. And I went to hospital. And basically 12 hours later, I was told that I was dying. And it was the biggest shock because even though I wasn't very well and I was being sick all the time and, I was hooked up to some drips, I just thought I'd got a bug. I just thought I was, I'll be all right. Like, if they can just sort me out, I've got dehydration and I've got a bug clearly, then I'll be fine. Like, not for a second do you think you're going to die. And that's how I was told. I was completely awake. This was way before I was put in intensive care. I was just basically lying there in a makeshift hospital, and a consultant came in, a doctor, and said, you've got this XXX, and 3 of your organs have already failed. you're dying. And it's funny how you react, because I didn't break down. I didn't go, and I think we have this like false perception of, in various different traumatic situations, that we're just gonna cry and go to pieces. And actually, like, the most common way a human acts is actually to detach ourselves, which is sometimes gives mixed cues. Like, we see that often in cases of rape and sexual abuse, where we see the victim and we're like, well, why is she not crying? Why is she not broken? Well, she is broken. It's just she's detached, or he's detached, because it's a way we can cope. And that's what happened to me. I could, if I'd have allowed emotion of, oh my God, I'm going to die, I don't know whether I'd survive. It was almost like I think we do it subconsciously. It's fight or flight. It's how we're incredible survivors, and how we as a human race can go through so many horrific things and still survive. And for me, I just remember thinking, well, I need help then. I need to get on an intensive care unit. And they said that my kidneys have failed. So I was like, well, I need dialysis then, and I just went into this like almost, it's so weird to describe, but almost this detached
How interesting.
person that was trying to take control of a situation because it was the only thing I knew what to do.
Yeah. I doubt everyone would react in that way, but that's a really interesting. I mean, do you think it was in your case then, do you think it was the right, in a perverse kind of way, was it the right thing to say, or was it actually, on reflection, do you wish they hadn't said it? If you go back and you think, if it was all going to happen again, what would I do differently? And I realized you were being done too.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would have gone to hospital earlier if it happened, because I think I learned a lesson there.
Right.
I learned a lot about myself, because I didn't go to hospital when I first got the symptoms. I just ignored it, and I actually went to work. I went to the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games, and all I thought about was not letting people down and doing my work. That's all I thought about. I didn't think about my health, which I've had to go back and do a lot of work on myself about why that was my automatic reaction. And it was because, I didn't have made very, very well, self-care mechanisms. And I think, work always was a priority to me. And I felt always like I didn't want to let people down. And that's something I've had to work on, because in that case, that side of me wasn't very good, because it actually meant that I went to hospital a lot later than I should have done. I'd already got kidney failure at that point, and who knows, if I'd have gone to hospital earlier, maybe I could have got help a little bit earlier and I wouldn't have the same amount of damage. Who knows? But when they said to me that I was going to die, I don't know, it's a great question, because I think in a way it was kind of a good thing, because it made me take it seriously. And right. I don't think I was before. I think, like I said, I was, and that wasn't, maybe deep down I knew, but I think this survivor side of me was just trying to convince myself that I was fine. And I didn't even tell people. I wasn't, I didn't tell my family. I didn't inform people. I was just like, I spoke to my agent, who you briefly met, and I said to him, I'm not very well, but tell people I'll be back at work tomorrow. Just put them off. I'll be fine. So I think when he said to me, look, you've got organ failure, you're dying, we don't know what's wrong with you, I think in a way it clicked that there was a problem, and I was seriously, fatally ill. And that's when I did, I was like, right, somebody needs to phone my mum, X needs to be called, this needs to happen, I need my health insurance because I was abroad. So, for them to take me into an intensive care unit, then I had to have health insurance, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to go in. And so it actually sounds weird, but it actually made things happen, because I was actually taking it seriously. But on the other hand, it was devastating, and it really, really has caused me mental problems since, because I never forget that moment when I was told I was dying. And I think because at the time I just went into almost like a very regimental thing where people needed to be called and this needs to happen. I probably didn't access the emotion. And then probably the whole time I was in that situation, because, that is common in traumatic events. We don't tend to access what's really happening and the real emotion we're feeling.
Absolutely.
That's the same with grief. In grief, that's when initially when we have grief, it doesn't hit us until probably a month after, when everybody else is going back to normal, and you're like, oh, I've just lost that person, and all these emotions come out. And that's what post-traumatic stress disorder is. And that's where you find that it can happen years later because you're in survival mode in that moment. And then it's after when the emotions start to creep up and it hits you. And I have had those moments where I've now, as time has gone on, felt really sad and hurt and had to work through the emotions that I felt because it was, it was terrorizing. But yeah, it's really interesting going back over, like, from a behavioural point of view anyway, because for me it did also trigger, I came from quite an abusive background, and I was also groomed and sexually abused as a teenager. And you might be thinking, well, why is that relevant? And because it triggered those same feelings that happened to me when I was younger. Something like that. It was almost like the same feeling of not being in control and something terrible happening to me. And that's where all the PTSD, and I got diagnosed with complex PTSD, or all the traumas I've been through wrapped up into one because I'd never dealt with them before, which really taught me how important it was to actually deal with things. And I think our human nature is not to, and I think we like to avoid things. We don't like to talk about things that really hurt us. We don't like to go to those deep emotions. And that's something that I really wasn't very good at. And I think I'm now in a position where I could admit that. But it also was how I survived a lot of things. Yeah. And now I know that for me to live a more fulfilled life, I've had to address the emotions that I felt around this. And that's what's helped. That's what really eased the PTSD off.
So other than, Charlie, just because a lot of this I'm hoping is going to go to sort of, people who work across healthcare and social care rather than, just specialists. And what I'm thinking is there any advice you'd give to sort of, if I say the average nurse or doctor or whatever, or an average healthcare worker, I'm in no way am I being rude, but I'm just thinking like someone who encounters someone who's clearly not okay in some way. Are there any sort of do's and don'ts that you'd say?
I've spoken to quite a few healthcare professionals, and they know way better than I do about how to do their job. But at the same time, a lot of them have found my story really interesting and made them think slightly differently, because we're all so grateful for them, and gosh, the job they do is amazing and the stress that they're under. But I think sometimes, and all of us are really guilty of this, that we focus so much on what we can see, physical health, and getting into a position where, okay, they're physically able to go home, they're physically able to be independent, but what about mentally? And I think that's the one thing that, rather than how are they feeling, because I think, again, we get in that trap of like, oh, well, if we just ask how they're feeling. I mean, if you'd have asked me how I was feeling, when I first saw the psychologist, and we laugh about this now, she asked me, and all I did was go, hey, I'm fine, I've just survived this, and I almost like reeled off everything I'd done. I didn't say, oh no, I'm really broken, because when you've got PTSD and when you're that bad, you can't say that. You can't. Like, this is what frustrates me. Like, when you're in that position where you're so traumatized or you're so depressed, you're not going to go, oh, well, actually, I'm feeling like this, I'm feeling like that, because what we do, we use these maladaptive coping mechanisms which protect us. They avoid, they detach, they comply to try and protect us. So actually, maybe asking, what you've gone through. If somebody said, what have I gone through? Then I would have gone, maybe being able to say, and then maybe all the emotion would have come out, and then maybe the other person would have gone, my gosh, there's really some suffering there. I don't know whether she's mentally okay. Maybe we need to get some help here. And I think, just taking a moment to look at what our experiences are and what that person's going through, and seeing beyond them as face value. What's their story? What are they living with? What do they wake up to in the morning? What goes through their brain? What have they gone through in the past? I think those are the questions that we need to ask. And also seeing past behaviours. Again, I think we can get stuck in this thing where, oh, well, they're acting fine and they look okay. I mean, the amount of times I've heard that said to me, oh, you look great. And inside, I literally have been so low.
So fractured, I guess.
Yeah, terribly fractured and really in a dark place. But I've had people say how good I look at that same moment where I've been, like you said, fractured and in a dark place. And, we've heard that in really sad cases where somebody has committed suicide. I know somebody who committed suicide, and the comments before were all like, well, I saw him the day before, he was fine. You know, and it's like he looked fine, or he was laughing and joking, and it's like that's what we have to be very careful of, is actually learning about what the actual cues are of mental health. Like, you know, you listened to my talk, and one of the things I talked about was when, you know, we might look at a young child or a teenager, and they might be extremely aggressive. You know, and of course we have to be careful and safeguarding, but at the same time, instead of being like, oh my God, that's a naughty child, why don't we see past their behaviours and ask why? Why are they having to behave like that? Because nobody chooses to behave like that. It comes from a place of struggle, a place of hurt, a place of insecurity, a place of unsafety, and a place of real pain. So to me, it's about that. That's the advice I'd give, is a much more holistic approach and looking beyond behaviours and asking better questions and deeper questions than, you know, how you feel.
Are you okay?
Yeah, we all do that. Come on, we all go, oh, I'm fine, I'm okay. Like, all of us do that. It's a self-protection mechanism.
Yeah. Well, I remember you saying that when taking you back, if I may, to the toothbrush incident, I think you said you were at home, and was it your mum and brother or sister that were there, and they found you in this sort of, you know, state on the floor of shaking and reacting, if I remember your story? Is that right?
Yeah, that was a slightly different scenario, but yeah, I did tell that story. Basically,
okay, nice. I just wondered, because, you know, we often do this when we're training people and say, would you recognize the signs of stress in your colleagues? And also, who would recognize the signs of stress in you? Generally, it's going to be people who know you pretty well, who can see beyond the facade, I think, isn't it? And often, you know, you say to people, how are you? Yeah, I'm fine. And people go, they shrug and they walk away. Whereas, you know, someone who's been through the situation that you've been through, people really should be able to, you know, people who are caring for you, if you like, who don't know the whole story maybe, but if they know a bit, at least you kind of hope they've got, first of all, the insight, and then the compassion to think this person could be damaged in a way that, you know, I have from my point of view as your carer, shall we say, that I have the power to influence that. I can either hopefully make it better, or I could, if I put my foot in it, make it considerably worse. You know, that's the sort of thing that I'm finding almost quite scary in terms of you know, the damage we can do by not thinking before we engage our mouth, if you like.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point you've made, because this is what I've found, you know, since what happened to me, and since I've been seeing a psychologist around PTSD, I've been studying behaviours basically, and the way we behave when we're feeling a certain way, and specifically to childhood adverse experience, and then what we act like as adults. And it's exactly what you were saying, because I think when we're feeling vulnerable, you know, if you think to like a normal scenario, like sometimes when we're feeling vulnerable or we've had a bad day and, you know, something hasn't worked out, what do? We don't all go, oh yeah, I've had a really bad day, it hasn't worked out. Sometimes actually we're snappy, we're short-tempered, you know, and that's not because we're snappy people or we're not nice people. That's because you're struggling inside. And sometimes those behaviors are a way of coping. I mean, like, you know, again, this scenario of a young child, they don't know how to cope with trauma. So maladaptive behaviors come about, and some of that is angry protector. I mean, we all, again, do that. We all, and I flipped between breaking down, and like you mentioned that scenario, it was my mum and brother actually, and all they were doing was cooking, and they were basically slapping at each other because my brother was like, oh, why are you chopping them like that? And my mum, it was basically, that's all it was. And it was, again, a very simple thing that if you were feeling okay, you wouldn't even batter an eyelid at. But something just clicked in me where it made me feel so anxious and unsafe. And it wasn't them, because they were voices that were so familiar to me. You know, it was how I was feeling. Like I was on alert all the time. I felt unsafe all the time because my brain had just been through something so traumatic, and it also triggered a lot of trauma that I went through when I was younger.
Gosh.
And so actually, like I did break down, I did cry, but I also snapped at them. And I remember even having a conversation with a friend of mine, and they were trying to be nice to me. And, you know, this is only like when I first just came out of hospital, and I was absolutely broken mentally and physically, of course. And, you know, and I really snapped at my friend, and I can't remember one of us put the phone down on each other, you know, and for me, all I wanted was comfort. But for them, they just saw me, they were trying to help me, but just saw me as somebody that was having a go at them. So isn't it funny how, like, there was both care there, but the cues were different. And I think that's something, if I could do one thing or educate anybody, it'd be just think why somebody is behaving that way. Like, you know, why was I doing that? It's not just breaking down and crying. I definitely was never that kind of person. Like, I didn't just, and again, that's a lot to do with my background. Like, if something was wrong, I didn't just burst out crying. And there's nothing wrong with that, because some people do, and that's, you know, it's a good thing. But for me, I'd probably go quiet. Like, if there's something wrong with me, I go quiet. My friends say that I go quiet, and that's harder to notice, right? That's a less obvious cue. Or I might be short and a bit sharp. And that actually, instead of somebody thinking, oh, I'm going to help her, that might actually deter people from helping me. Yes. So I think it's, again, like learning what we do as humans, that it's not so simple as, okay, well, if they cry, that's something wrong with them. Or if they say, oh, I'm fine, then it means there's not. I think it's just understanding human behavior. And like you said, taking a minute if we all could just take a minute to think, why are they being like that? I wonder if they're like being, I don't know, quite angry because they're really struggling inside, rather than being, oh my God, she's horrible or he's horrible. They're just angry, like, you know.
We're also quick to.
I know I'm simplifying it, but it's true.
Well, you're absolutely right. But we you know, we all are. We're so quick to judge. You know, I'm guilty of it, and quite often other people are. My wife and I have known each other now 50 years, which is pretty amazing, and. I've often say this, that there's kind of like a code word. When she suddenly says to me, you know, have you had anything to eat lately? And I now know that what she means is I'm being snappy. So, you know, it's nothing compared to what you've got, but it's like the hangry stuff. And because she will recognize it straight away. She knows that's not really me. But as soon as I'm getting snappy and a bit short-tempered, twigs that it's probably I just haven't looked after myself and hadn't eaten something lately. In other words, as you said so superbly, there is a reason. It's not just because I'm a bad person, you know.
Yeah, and you're not. And it's actually a really good example, because it says recognizing human behavior. And that's like, to me, you know, I really feel that we should put human experience at the center of things, and a trauma-informed approach when we look at all sorts of things. Again, I go back, very passionate about this in young children, because if we go into schools or children come into hospitals, you know, we should be looking at signs of why children are behaving in a certain way. And in schools, if a child is, you know, quite withdrawn, or another child is quite aggressive, you know, they get labels instead of looking at past their behaviors and asking why they are withdrawn, or why they are angry, or why they are like aggressive, because that kids don't just decide that comes from protecting themselves from something or a learned behavior. And like one of the things like I found really interesting when I've been working on stuff around PTSD, and the reason why I talk about it is not, you know, it's not to go, oh look, this is what I went through, and yeah, it is an inspiring story. But one of the other reasons is, you know, I want to try and raise awareness for all aspects, because children, there's a lot of children that have PTSD. In the UK, 1 in 13 children have PTSD that we know of. That's just what we know of before they reach 18. So then what is that 1 in every 13 kid feeling like and behaving like? And are we giving them help? Are we, you know, we leaving them with no choice, where they feel like, you know, they have no life? And because when you've got PTSD, you know, the way I described it when I gave my talk, it's like your reality is different from my reality. What I'm seeing, you know, what I was seeing in that bathroom in that moment where I was brushing my teeth was not what you were seeing. So it's about understanding different people's reality because of what they've gone through.
Did you recognize it as such, as PTSD? Did you know, or did someone diagnose it for you?
No, I didn't know initially. I just knew that I wasn't okay.
Right.
But that again took me a while to recognize. I knew I wasn't okay, and I knew that I needed help. But I didn't know it was PTSD. I didn't even know what PTSD was. And, you know, and I don't know, like I was diagnosed with depression when I was in my late teens. So it's not like I don't know mental health. So the fact that I didn't really understand PTSD, then, you know, not a lot of people do, because again, it's associated with people in combat. And while, of course, they do have PTSD, actually the most common cause of PTSD is from trauma within our own home and our own relationship. So again, we're just not very well educated on PTSD. And no, I didn't recognize it. And when I knew that I needed help, and because I just couldn't cope and I wasn't okay, and I've, you know, even though I had depression when I was younger, it was very different symptoms.
Right.
You know, I was having really bad panic attacks. I couldn't cope with the slightest thing. Like there was one moment where I was walking down the street. This is very early days in my recovery, and I was still struggling to walk, but you know, I was having to walk to try and build my muscle up, and a car reversed and it made me jump, and I cried, and I just needed to go home because I needed to just be in a safe environment. And I even remember when I first went to my first psychology appointment, ironically, I was stood in the reception, and I can't remember what it was, but there was something like a mix-up, and I just couldn't cope with it. Whereas normally, like I would have been like, oh, because I'm quite a chilled, you know, like, you know, I'm quite a high energy person, but before I would have been like, oh, don't worry about it. Like I was always that kind of person. But in that moment, in the reception, I was like, oh, I can't cope with this. Why is there a mix-up? I need it to be sorted. And you just can't cope with things. And I knew that wasn't me. But then again, like I said, when I first got help, I knew I needed help, but I didn't quite understand what that meant.
When you first went for help then, Charlie, you know, were the initial meetings helpful? Were there anything that you remember as being particularly helpful, or alternatively, I don't want to focus on the negative, but anything that was particularly unhelpful?
I think initially, I mean, I was lucky. I had a very good psychologist, and it was on the NHS. And I'm very grateful for that.
Great to hear, of course.
Yeah, I mean, the waiting lists are terrible. I had to wait a long time, but I did get some great help. And, you know, initially I knew that I needed help, but I think I didn't quite understand what help I needed. I think I just wanted the psychologist to make it better. And I suppose the thing about mental health and psychology is that the only way we can make it better is actually really accessing the feelings. And that's something that I initially struggled with because I've always protected myself. And that's actually, you know, one of the doctors, and I said this in my talk, that they said to me that, you know, one of the reasons I survived was, one, because I was so physically healthy and fit, but two was because I was so mentally strong.
Right.
And that's, you know, one thing I found interesting was they recognized me as so mentally just strong, and how that could play a part in shaping my life. But then we don't seem to want to talk about or want to really understand how that could also end people's lives and destroy us. But one of the most useful things that the psychologist said to me, and has helped me a lot, and, you know, for anybody out there listening, this may help them and may help other people, is, you know, you said it's hard to recognize when somebody isn't okay, but it's also really hard to recognize in ourselves when we're not okay.
Yes.
It really is. It's not like, you know, again, we're this complex human thing where, you know, we don't always realize, like, it comes out in other ways. It comes out in other behaviors. It comes out physically too. Like we might get a cold, or, you know, we might get a lot of tension and we don't quite realize that we're not okay. You know, with that, one of the things the psychologist taught me to do was to go, because I was not recognizing very well how I was feeling. I just knew that something was wrong, but I didn't recognize that my emotion necessarily that was attached to it. And so she said to me, ask yourself what it is you're feeling. So think about it. Like, what am I actually feeling? Try and label it and be like, you know, as an example, oh, I feel sad. And then it's like, well, why do you feel sad?
Mm-hmm.
And then being like, okay, why do I feel sad? Or I feel sad because X has happened, or I'm feeling really sad because I'm connecting with what happened to me, and actually I should feel sad because it is sad about what happened to me, and that's okay. So what do I need in that moment to make myself feel okay, to tend to that emotion? And I know it sounds quite a simple process, but honestly, if that, just using that helps us recognize and identify how we're feeling. Because I think, again, I've had conversations with my friends, because I'm quite a gung-ho personality.
I can tell.
Tend to sit with my feelings. So I think, again, like I said, I've had conversations with people where it's like, we just get on with things. I'm from a very tough northern family, suck it up, deal with it, don't actually acknowledge what we're feeling. But actually, the feelings don't go anywhere. The feelings don't just disappear because we're ignoring them. They actually sit there and they fester, and they come out in other ways. They come out in behaviours. They come out in protecting ourselves because we feel hurt, because we feel vulnerable, because we feel unsafe. And they just sit there and they build and they grow. And that's what PTSD does. That's why, like I said, you can have PTSD 5-10 years down the line. Like we've heard that with soldiers. I use that as an example because we've seen that before, where soldiers will, maybe 10 years down the line be having flashbacks about some of the horror they saw. But it's nothing to do with war. It's horror. It's trauma. So it doesn't matter what trauma that is. And that's why accessing the feeling of it and actually what we went through is the most important thing, because that's when you actually give it time. And if you give it time, that's when you can start to mend it. So I think that's something I've learned. That's the most useful thing ever to me. Yes. Because like I said, I had a habit of just, pushing it away. And I did that initially when I came out of hospital, because all I thought about was, oh my God, I've got to find myself again. I've got to get back to work. I've got to show everybody that I'm still okay. I've got to, show myself that I could still do stuff, that I was still worthy. So I didn't actually give myself time to go, oh, are you all right? What have you been through? Gosh, this is really bad,
Yes. And are you, forgive my asking, but, I know you've got kidney problems. Are they, and they're still ongoing, are they? Do you need dialysis or?
No, I'm really, really lucky and grateful that I don't need dialysis at the moment. I was on dialysis for quite a bit. And then now they're working on their own. They're not at a very high percentage, but they're high enough to not be on dialysis. And at the moment, so that's been 3 years. So over the last 3 years, it's been longer. It's been less, time that I came off dialysis, maybe 2.5 years. And it's just been about monitoring where they're at and stabilizing, because I don't have kidney disease. I have kidney damage. So I've got a lot of dead tissue in my kidneys, and it was to see whether, how much they would start to work again. So they're nowhere near what function I initially had, which, although I am very grateful that I do have my kidneys working, it was still really hard to deal with and frustrating, because I was like, I'm very active, and I was thinking to myself, well, I didn't have a kidney problem before. My kidneys worked really well, and I could do all these things. I'm into sport and competition, and that was a big part of my life. It's a bit like, God, if I don't have working kidneys, then what do I do? What is that part of my life? Because I've done sport since I was a kid. So that did affect me initially, but then I turned it on its head and thought, well, I do have my kidneys working, so I've survived, and doctors said I wasn't going to survive. So let's see what I can do with them. Let's do everything right. Let's see if we can get them working as long as I can possibly can. And so that's where I am. Who knows? They don't know whether they're going to last. They might not last forever.
Do you have a regular, I guess you have regular checkups to make sure you're okay. And I was only going to say, because we may want to sort of wrap this up in a minute. We've been going quite a while. It's fantastic. And I've learned, I've learned a huge amount, I must say. But I'm just wondering if there's any particular examples you've had where people have treated you with particular compassion or empathy or understanding, that they might not even realize. Because I think one of the things we find is some people just take things for granted, and they often don't realize what they've done was particularly helpful. I mean, some people do, obviously, but sometimes people I just wonder if anything has struck you as being, something that's really made you go, oh, that was nice, and that was helpful, and anything at all?
In what sense?
The way you've been treated by people, as opposed, because, people always tend to focus on the negative. So-and-so was rude to me, so-and-so was ignored, and so-and-so, didn't treat me appropriately. I always tend to think of the negative. It's only a question of whether you've come across anything which you've thought, damn it, that was nice. That was.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I have hundreds of examples.
Well, just a couple then,
Especially within hospitals. So the first one is actually not in England. It was in Rio. It was a nurse called Raphael, and he couldn't speak any English, and I don't speak Portuguese. And it just shows you how important physical communication is.
Mm-hmm.
I've got that right. So obviously we couldn't speak to each other, but he made me feel, for that second while I was with him, he made me feel like somebody cared and like I was safe. And that was the most important thing right at that moment, because I felt so unsafe. And
so how did he do? Yeah, what did he do then? How did he do it?
He smiled at me. He smiled at me. He looked at me, and he treated me like a human being, whereas some of the other nurses didn't. And it was as simple as that. He looked at me. He smiled. He comforted me. He was kind and he was gentle. Wasn't abrupt, whereas some of the other nurses were abrupt. And just that simplest thing made me, when he walked in that room, it lit me up. And for that moment, it made me feel safe. And that was my most important thing. To me, I think we focus so much on other things, but I think safety is one of the most important things for all of us to feel.
Yeah. And I guess emotional safety as well as physical safety. Yeah.
And then in the UK, again, there was a person who delivered meals at lunchtime. It was a guy, and he just, again, he did the simplest things there. He chatted to me a little bit and, talked to me about, I don't know, nothing really, but he just took time with me. And that's another thing we're all so short on. But actually, are we really that short on time that we can't spend 2 minutes just to make somebody, we are humans that need human connection. Healing, the most effective form of healing is through human connection. And all he did, honestly, I can't even remember our conversations, but I remember him. All he did was just give me the food, and we had maybe a joke about what the food was. And, maybe I had a bit of a joke about football. And then he left. But I actually saw him about a year after, when I was in the hospital for a consultant appointment, and I remembered him more than some of the other people, and he remembered me. And I just said to him, I just want to say thanks so much. And he was like, oh, I didn't even do anything. And because he wasn't a medical team, and as to say directly, but again, the people that are the porters and deliver the meals are so important as well. And also my consultant, finally, because I know we've got to go, the renal consultant, he didn't just, I spoke a lot about how everybody just focused on my physical, and everybody did, but he saw me as an individual, where he asked me whether I wanted to know everything about what happened to me and everything that was going on. And he actually taught me about kidneys. He spent time to teach me about what percentages were and what it meant and what I needed to do, because he said to me, not all patients like to know. And I said, well, I do. I want to know. So me as an individual, he saw me as me and not just your average patient or another patient, and just presumed that I wanted the same as every other patient. And that's really important. He saw, like me, I wanted the information, and he helped me with that. And that, again, made a massive difference, because I'm the sort of person where I like to know, I need to know. And where not everybody's like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's respect, isn't it? He respected you as a person in your own right, not just a case. And that's something we hear a lot of is, were you treated as a person or a case? And, it's the old thing about, are you Charlie Webster, or are you, the one in the bed over there with the da-di-da-di-da, such and such a complaint.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's such a simple message and so powerful, I think.
Yeah. And I think we miss the simple things. We focus on how can we improve technology, and how can we improve our everything else? And it's of course, that's all important. But my God, no matter how much technology is advanced, we're still humans at the end of the day. We're still made up of the same stuff, and we still need those simple things. And it was those simple things that made the difference to me. Yeah.
Brilliant. Charlie, I think we've been going nearly an hour, and that's... I can't thank you enough. And
it's my pleasure.
Thanks so much, Charlie. Bye now. Bye. Well, it was a real pleasure to speak to Charlie Webster today, and I'm really grateful for her time on Atrainability Radio. that conversation, I'm sure, will give you plenty to think about, particularly PTSD and how people around us that we interface with might potentially be suffering from it. I think certainly it continues the running theme about thinking about patients as people, which I think is really the crux of all of the podcasts that we're going on about. So you'll find the show notes for this episode on Atrainability Radio on our website, www.atrainability.co.uk. And if you search for episode 3 with Charlie Webster, and within those show notes, you'll find links and some useful resources. So please do help spread the word about Atrainability Radio. Tell a friend about the show maybe, or colleagues. And if you've not already done so, you can subscribe to this podcast in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time then, thank you for listening. I've been Trevor Dale, and this has been Atrainability Radio.